Hi, Mario the Spirit Scholar here, and I want to talk to you about the early 1860s and a vintner from Europe who gets the idea to take an American vine and bring it to the Rhone Valley in France. Little did they know they'd be bringing a guest with them, and that guest's name was Phyloxera vacitrix, the Devastator. Now that sounds like an awesome name for a supervillain, and it was to Vitis vinifera. But Vitis vinifera is not your common sci-fi or superhero. Vitis vinifera is actually the common grapevine, and it was abused and destroyed and demolished by Phyloxera in the 1860s in France, and really affected the spirits industry as far as cognac and Armagnac production, and had a long range of influence. So let's take a look. So Phyloxera had actually turned the world of wine, brandies, and spirits on its head, devastating the crops in the Charentes region of France. It was the home of cognac, and it destroyed 70% of those viable grapes. It had a reign of terror that actually wouldn't abate for at least 30 years, into the 1890s. So this was just kind of on a biblical level. But what exactly is Phyloxera? Well, it's a louse, the same kind of thing as what lice is. But it's an aphid specifically, so it means that it's a louse but lives on greenery, so it's basically tree lice. And what makes it so lethal is that not only are they good flyers, but they're also good at self-procreating. A single female, without any mate, on its own, just one alone, can produce 1 billion in a year. The offspring spread themselves throughout the vineyard, looking for fresh roots to destroy. And the size is only 1/30th of an inch. So how do you find a solution to a crazy pandemic like this, like the Phyloxera bug? Well, they tried poisons that affected both the bug and humans. They used holy water, and they even tried urine. I mean, they did this all earnestly. But the only really acceptable and long-term solution was to graft the old world vines onto the American roots. The American roots were immune to the Phyloxera bug. They actually, with evolution and time, had natural defenses like extruding a sticky sap, and that would actually clog the mouth of the louse and stop it from destroying the roots of the vines. Now keep in mind, there is no cure for this. This is just a solution. So this bug still exists. And what really made French nationalists apprehensive about this is affecting the flavor of the wine. And they had a big issue with this because their pride kind of seemed on the line, but eventually they had to accept it. And especially, this doesn't actually affect the taste of it. The American rootstock protects the grape, but it doesn't create a hybrid in any way, shape, or form. So you can actually get the really nice, beautiful grape French wine terroir without having sort of an adulterated American influence on it, which they had feared right from the very beginning. So how did this become a France and a European and a cognac problem? Well, the thing is, anytime people actually tried to plant old world vines in the eastern US, they were being attacked by Phyloxera, but they didn't understand what was exactly happening. And it's something that doesn't really affect the West Coast. But, it wasn't just the eastern US or France that are affected by this. We have Australian vintners had come across it as well. And in California, their vineyards were destroyed as well because Phyloxera existed east of the Rockies. So when people started going to western expansion and going to where the Vitis vinifera was growing in California, and quite successfully, I might add, they actually eventually started destroying it. And so they started taking roots from central and eastern US. So you had to make the same solution for California vines that were on the same level as European vines. And unfortunately, this is something that has affected a lot of different vineyards on a global scale, especially those that use old world vines. And there are actually very few countries now that even offer grape varieties that have not been affected by Phyloxera and who don't use the American rootstock, though they do exist. Now, if you have to admit that there were benefits to the influence of Phyloxera, well, it actually did lead to quite a few things. It wasn't very singular. So the consideration of terroir in grapes was now commonplace. It was something that people knew about, but now they embraced it, especially in France, but in major parts of the country as well. And so now it becomes a selling point for terroir to be in wine. In European culture, with a lack of access to cognac, absinthe and beer became huge. They actually became a cultural phenomenon. So you'll see famous art pieces from the time actually incorporate absinthe and beer into their artworks, which they never did before. And America used to really embrace cognac as a kind of a high-level thing, but now you have bourbon and rye productions taking over, you have embracing of the American style, and so they're becoming very popular. Classic American cocktails like the Sazerac and others, which had cognac or brandy as their base, are actually switching them out for whiskey or rye or other elements in there. And the UK, which was always making Irish whiskey or Scotch whiskey in some capacity, the market had grown huge. And those who are living in England now want to really embrace Irish and Scottish whiskeys, which they never did on the same level as before. And this is actually when you start seeing blended whiskeys. But this is what happens. It was a game changer by having this Phyloxera pandemic take over. And you also see things like even within cognac, they actually got to be more selective with their grapes. And you had Follet Blanche, which was the most popular grape beforehand, but 70% of it was destroyed in the process. And Uni Blanc became more prosperous in cognac. So you have a different mindset on what cognac should taste like. They had more control about the regions where they should be made and about what style it should be and how flavorful it should be. And then even things like Armagnac got to kind of step in at certain points in time and became stronger in the process. So as much as we should be or may hate Phyloxera, it really created a huge contribution on a global scale to drinking culture and expectations. So hopefully you can see what something like a pandemic can do to an industry. Now there are bad elements to it by losing a lot of crops and a lot of vintners and a lot of cognac and Armagnac makers who struggled, but they were able to develop and make a better product as time went on. They can make proper decisions. And a lot of countries, instead of leaning on France for their expectations for wine or for brandies, kind of started producing their own things or producing their own whiskeys. So there's a good and bad to everything, and as society, we can kind of adapt and develop and move on, which is really beautiful about the spirits industry because this is not the only time in the past or in the future where adversity is going to hurt the spirits industry. So we've got to learn to adapt and adjust, whether it's in our cocktails, whether it's in our production styles, or what the consumer is actually drinking. So hopefully you can kind of keep this in mind that there are good and bad to pandemics, and they can affect even us, even if they're little aphids. So just something to keep in mind the next time you're imbibing and enjoying your future spirit. But as always, drink what you love and love what you drink.